Hello, today we'll be talking about the economics of media companies, including a discussion of media ownership. Understanding the business and the economic side of media helps you better understand some of the factors that influence the content that you, as a media consumer and citizen, ultimately receive. There are two primary ways we can view the structure of media, either through the market model or the public sphere model. The market model refers to media and its content existing in a market, just like any other goods such as cars or toasters. The market model assumes that a product will compete with other similar products to be the best in the marketplace and will therefore be purchased by more consumers. Market orientation and the media means that audiences are thought of as consumers first, and media content is essentially viewed as the product to be sold. On the other hand, the public sphere model refers to media serving a special role in society with its content, advancing ideas, and ultimately promoting democracy. Public sphere orientation of the media means that audiences are thought of as members of a public first, and media content is viewed as essentially a public service. So in the market orientation, the consumers are buying a product, which is the media content. In the public sphere model, the consumers is the public again, but this time what is provided is a service rather than something that we consume for its value. There are advantages and disadvantages as to how we view and organize the media. We'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. When we think about the advantages and disadvantages of the market and public sphere models of media, it is fair to apply criticisms to different media based on the roles each media type plays in society. For this lecture, we're going to be focusing primarily on what each model means for journalism, but you could also consider the influences the media models have on other types of content, including entertainment media such as movies and television shows. There are four primary advantages to the market model. It promotes efficiency, innovation, responsiveness, and flexibility. In theory, the market model encourages the company to work more efficiently, figuring out ways to produce products with less cost to the consumers. It encourages innovation and responsiveness because the most successful company would be most likely the one to come up with the new ideas that are in line with what the consumers want. If you have lots of competitors, you don't innovate and meet the demands of the customers, and chances are your competitors will. So, for journalism, that has real advantages. More competition in the media companies provide better employee training. They invest more in innovative products and innovating products, and often provide better pay and better equipment. Competition had pushed the companies to this end. However, the true value of the market model rests on the assumption that the market allows for robust competition. Is that true of how media outlets are owned today? Take a look at the number of media outlets identified here. Some are owned by the same company. How many total owners do you think are represented here? Actually, only about 6, maybe 5 companies own all the media you saw on the previous page. As a matter of fact, while I was creating these slides, CBS and Viacom merged, so this slide is a little bit inaccurate, showing that instead of having 6 companies controlling everything that you saw on the page beforehand, only 5 companies are controlling, and this seems to be the trend, well, for the last 20 years or so. The vast majority of most popular media sources in the U.S. are owned by just a few large companies, and this is scary to me and should be scary for you too. Let's take the Walt Disney Company, for example. It counts among its holdings ABC News, ESPN, Lucasfilm, and Marvel Entertainment, and that's just to name a few. Over the past 30 years or so, the number of media companies owning the majority of, well, that was just a bad sentence there. As I have said, the past 20, 30 years, the number of media companies out there become less and less. And they control more and more of what you see. In the early 1980s, about 50 companies owned the majority of U.S. media. For the past decade, that number has been around 5 or 6. The problem is that the market model relies on competition to function in its best interest of the consumer. When there are only a few large firms owning the majority of any sector of the economy, like the media, then we have to ask ourselves whether a choice exists or not. For example, let's say we only had 2 car companies in our country. Well, you wouldn't have much choice, and they would give us what they felt we needed or what they wanted to sell us, and there wouldn't be much competition. You only had one person to compete against, so there was no need to innovate, no need to pay their employees well, and no need to be cutting edge. And that's pretty much what we have with the media companies now, is that we have about 5 car companies, and if you don't like what one car company is selling, I'll bet you the next car company down the street has about the same thing. A Honda Accord, a Toyota Camry. What's really the difference? So, do we have a choice? Well, let's look at the top 10 movies in the box office. And just list them down here. Who owns Avengers Endgame? That's Disney. Avatar, that has been recently purchased by Disney through the acquirement of Fox Entertainment. Same thing with Titanic. Star Wars The Force Awakens, that's Disney. Avengers Infinity War, Disney. Jurassic World is owned by Universal. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, Disney. The Lion King, Disney. The Avengers, Disney. And Furious 7, that's Universal. So 8 of the top 10 are Disney properties and 2 are Universal properties. And if you go to Orlando, yeah, you have 2 parks to pick from too. Not a lot of competition, outside of those 2 big juggernauts. Now, the government has tried to control media conglomerates, the merging of companies, and the FCC, in its early efforts to maintain at least some kind of restriction on media ownership, had helped to preserve this under the claim that it would foster competition. And this went on for a long time with such regulations as one company can only own the number of media that would reach 35% of the nation's public. Anything more than that, you couldn't own or buy the next newspaper, buy the next radio station. But the 1996 Telecommunications Act did away with a lot of the previous media ownership regulations, and a new era was born. But rather than foster competition, the Telecommunications Act had opened the floodgates to restore industry consolidation, reducing the number of major media companies from around 80 in 1986 to a mere 6 by 2006. Of companies that control 90% of the marketplace. And so, despite having hundreds of cable channels, magazines, and radio stations at our fingertips, media consolidation has created the illusion of choice. As we learned earlier, the government regulation can play a part in how media are structured. For a long time, in the 1940s until the 1990s, this control by the FCC was stringent and very limited as far as ownership rules. Let's see, one of the rules, besides the 35% of the nation's public being reached by your media, there was also a rule that the same company could not own a newspaper and a television station in the same town. Well, that regulation's gone now. As a matter of fact, when you start looking at a company like Gannett, they own local TV in southern Indiana, and they also own the Courier-Journal, which is Louisville's newspaper, only daily, large-scale newspaper. And even if you try to go a little bit north to Indianapolis, the Indy Star is also owned by Gannett. So you're hearing one voice very loud in a good section of Indiana. So lately, a lot of companies have been sold or merged together into one large conglomerate. And if you want to explore what the largest U.S. companies own, you can go to the Columbia Journalism Review, which is part of your reading this week, and just type in companies like Gannett, Clear Channel, Disney, Time Warner, and see exactly what they do own. So what are some disadvantages of the market model for media? Well, we mentioned some of it with decreased competition, but even if we assume there is a robust competition, our needs as citizens might not be met by a market-driven media source. Markets don't necessarily serve democratic needs. Because media markets, are only interested in maximizing profit. That means even when there are democratic needs, for example, hard-hitting watchdog journalism, there might not be a market for that. No one wants to watch that. In fact, there might be forces, such as the high cost to produce investigative journalism, that would prevent that reporting from being done. After all, if the same relatively large number of people watch news about celebrities as investigative journalism, there would be no force to produce investigative journalism. As a matter of fact, the market would say to produce more celebrity news if that's what's selling. So, what's the answer? Which model works best? The public sphere model or the market model? Perhaps what we need is a mix of the two models. In the U.S., most media is commercial, but it's not that way around the world. For example, the British model has a hybrid of this mix of the public and private media. What's important to take away from this lecture is that understanding media ownership is central to understanding the news and the information you receive. And even if we advocate for the market model and its advantages it brings, we must ask ourselves if the current structure allows for the competition that is needed for the market model to work and to best serve consumers. So we need the market model to encourage competition and spark innovation, but ownership right now is tending to be consolidated, creating oligopolies, which means that a very few companies control most of what's going on, or a small group controls the public. And that's what's happening with media. And of course, this lack of competition discourages innovation. So, what should you do as a consumer of media? And I mentioned at the beginning of the semester that one of our learning goals is to make you a savvy media consumer. So, here's what you should do as a savvy media consumer. One, be aware. Be aware that the motivations of media companies may not be in the public interest. Know that what's good for the media company may not be always what's good for the public, and understand what media consolidation means for the messages we receive. We'll hear fewer voices, so we'll have fewer choices. Fewer voices, fewer choices is the best way to put it. So that's the lecture for today. Please spend some time at the Columbia Journalism Review's Who Owns What website and see just how few voices there are out there.